is definitely a fancy one, right? And the awkward thing is technology entered the insurance industry before any other part of the financial services industry. So the first use of computer was actually in insurance and not in banking. The one thing that I'd say is a lot of people say look for large market, etc., etc. The first thing I'll tell you is even if it's a small market, as long as you find an adjacent market either today or 3-4 years down the line, which can grow into a large market, or you're in a market which is small today and growing fast, you're pretty okay, right? So don't fall for this large market trap.
Hey guys, this is Rahul. He's the co-founder of BimaPay. BimaPay is basically an inshore tech company. He also has a newsletter that is called InsurTech Tribe, which is ranked number one under InsurTech category on Substack. He has graduated from Warwick University and has experience in this field, in the insurance field. He also has 10K followers on Twitter and LinkedIn each, uh, which is huge. So yeah, Rahul, my first question to you would be, how do you describe yourself? Like, how do you describe the work that you do?
Yeah, okay. So it's a good one, right? So I'll say, beginning by describing myself, then what I do work-wise. The way I sort of see myself as someone who's just an ordinary person who works extraordinarily hard. I think there is sort of this baseline intelligence after which the number of hours you put in really determines the output you have. But yeah, the short summary of me is this ordinary person. I work incredibly hard. I've always worked sort of incredibly hard, even through school. And what I really enjoy doing is picking a difficult problem or a problem or an industry which people say is boring, doesn't have a solution, will always be shit and difficult, and try to build something interesting there. So whether this was at college with me playing around in cryptography and machine learning in the federated learning space, or now in direct to consumer insurance, which people think is dead because of large aggregators and offline plays. I think the
Yeah.
sleepy parts of the world is what sort of excites me. And just going up against this sort of hill climb where you have to continuously push yourself is what excites me as a person. So that's a short summary about me.
So I want to know about the insurtech space. Can you tell us more about it? Because this is a new thing that I heard
Yeah.
first time when I saw your profile, that there can be tech in insurance as well. So
Yeah.
can you tell us more about it?
Yeah. It's definitely a fancy one, right? And the awkward thing is technology entered the insurance industry before any other part of the financial services industry. So the first use of computer was actually in insurance and not in banking. But it's just that something happened over a 40-year period where insurance completely forgot about using tech. And quite broadly, there are different mental models you can use to understand what insurtech is trying to do to insurance. So you can either look at it from an insurance company perspective, or you can look at it from a customer perspective, right? So I can quickly take both lenses. They're very simple mental models. When you look at what a consumer's sort of insurance purchase or insurance life cycle is there is a pre-purchase when you're trying to just understand what insurance is, figure out what products and companies are available in the market. There is a purchase, which is when you go on the screen or you have someone call you or someone come to your house to make a purchase. And then there's post-purchase and claims, right? Post-purchase is just a little bit of life cycle management, like reminding you, Viraj,
Yeah.
you've got insurance, don't forget about it. And claims is pretty straightforward, right? You hope to get some money back. There are different startups trying to solve different parts of their journey, right? So you have some companies trying to do pre-purchase, which is pure awareness advisory model. You have some, that are trying to build online aggregators or offline brokers to help with the purchase part. And you now have a huge set of companies trying to automate the claims side, right? Because on the claim side, you integrate with hospitals, with garages, you have a lot of point of sale devices or point of purchase devices that get connected to a cloud system. So that's when you look at it from the customer lens, right? If you look at it from the lens of an insurance company, just like how banking has different silos in it, like deposits, mortgages, credit card, debit card, etc., etc. In insurance, I don't want to bore you too much with it, but there's something like underwriting, pricing, etc., etc. And you again have technology companies solving not only a small sort of sliver of, say, underwriting or pricing, but they even do it within a single vertical in insurance. And just because the market size is so large, you can actually have companies that build specialized pricing models for something called wildfire risk. And wildfire risk is just like what happened in Australia, right?
Yeah.
Where the bushes ignited and burnt down a ton of property. But you can have a venture scale outcome in just one small sliver of insurance where you're helping these reinsurance and insurance companies build better pricing models. So insurtech has been around for about, I'd say, at least 10 years now. And the first generation of companies are slowly starting to see liquidity events, like Lemonade went public, Root Insurance went public in the USA. And the way I sort of see it is, it's just like fintech, except less cool, right? Because fewer people want to talk about it. So that's quite broadly the way I see it. And finally coming to India, right, with a couple of companies like Acco, Digit, Shaw Claim Buddy, and a whole long list of companies. So if you want me to like dive into anything specific about InsurTech, I'm pretty happy to. Or if you want to just talk about sort of the
I
journey
think
of
I
building.
think keeping
Yeah,
it on the
yeah,
upside is a lot
yeah,
better for because we have
yeah,
a lot of young folks here.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So I wanted to ask what what is the thinking that goes behind starting a company? Uh,
Mhm.
like for all the young folks out here, we are confused. Like, how do you start a company? Basically, that's the beginner question, right?
Mhm.
So any thoughts about like what do you have to look at when you begin the market size or whatever it is? Can you please talk us through
Yeah,
that?
definitely, right. So the one thing that I'd say is, a lot of people say look for large market, etc., etc. The first thing I'll tell you is, even if it's a small market, as long as you find an adjacent market either today or 3-4 years down the line, which can grow into a large market, or you're in a market which is small today and growing fast, you're pretty okay, right? So don't fall for this large market trap, because the moment you start thinking of large market, you think of solution for a general population rather than building a product that can solve a specific problem for a specific kind of person, right? So it's all right to have this vision of a grand market, but begin with that single user persona whom you're solving for. And I can give you the example of Bima Pay, right? So for
Yeah.
us, that user persona is that 28 to 40-year-old urban working professional, typically earning 30,000 rupees or more per annum, reasonably financially savvy. Ballpark estimates suggest that about 20 million such individuals. So everything we do, from the channels we choose to reach out to you about insurance, to the content we write, to the assumptions that we make about your financial literacy, keep in mind all of those demographic factors. So when you are going out there to solve a problem, right, first begin with the persona you're solving for, because you begin with the problem and not with the product that's going to solve the problem, right? A lot of people think that it's product market fit, but it's actually market product fit, wherein you figure out the problem in your market and then build a product that solves for that market. Now, there are
Yeah.
a couple of exceptions, like hard technology, where you're building product for product's sake, right? And then you go out and find a use case. If you're shooting satellites out into space, you may begin with the excitement for it being a big technical challenge to get a rocket from ground up and back to the planet, and then figure out how to monetize it. But most products would typically begin with some consumer insight, which is typically a problem that the consumer faces, typically a problem you have faced. So I'll give you a specific example again, right? At Bima Pay, the biggest problem I've always faced is the fact that, here I'm an actuary, I understand insurance. I still sometimes have no idea what we're covered for in our policy document, right? And I have no way to know as to whether what the insurance company is telling me and what the ground truth is actually the same. And then when you identify a personal problem, you maybe go out, speak to 5, 10, 15 people, but you always sort of keep in mind this this sort of user persona, and I model that user persona around myself. And for me, I thought of myself as fairly financially sophisticated, earning a certain amount or more per month. So
Yeah.
when you are going about starting that journey, right, just forget market sizing for a little bit and just think about what that persona is, right? Try to quantify something called a job to be done. And for those of you who haven't heard of job to be done, it's this idea from Clayton Christensen that a person buys your product not for the sake of buying your product, but because your product solves a particular job for them. And that job has a functional lens. So it's that core utility which your product provides to them. There is a social lens. So when I think of insurance, I don't think of insurance just for Viraj, but it's for Viraj's family as well. And that's how you design your product and your approach. And you'll see Bima Pay morph into something very different in the next 12 months. And the final thing is understand an emotional dimension of your product, right? So again, taking the example of insurance, the emotion is a little bit of fear, little bit of lack of trust. So trying to come in with a bit of clarity, simple words, telling the user where they don't get covered. So the way I'd approach it is if you're starting out like today, think about the user persona, think about the job to be done for that user persona, and then go out there and try to validate your problem with users.
Yeah.
If you aren't familiar with a minimum viable product, very simple. The idea is build something small, something simple, something cheap, which you can go test with the user. Best tool to do that is Figma. Figma is free. If you have an educational account, you can actually create it for yourself and 10 friends, 15 friends there, and you can play around. So that's really how I'd say you start out with the journey. And this is even before building a company, right? So a company is very different. What I just described to you is building a product. A company is product plus team plus business model. And the team and business model are probably like the next two things which you should give a bit of thought to. But quite broadly, that is how I would say you should begin. That is how we began at Bima Pay, right? So simple Figma wireframes. To be honest with you, I didn't even bother writing a lot of code, just began with a super simple Glide prototype. So for those of you who haven't heard of Glide, it's a simple no-code tool on top of Google Sheets, right? So you can build a really nice UI with no understanding of React and still get a product out there.
That's interesting. Uh, Coming back to, you mentioned solving a problem. Insurance in India, I looked up, it has been around for quite a while. It has been around for like 2 centuries or something. Now, for an industry this old, what is the problem that you're solving with Bima Pay?
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. And I think the way I sort of describe what we're trying to do is bring not only transparency in terms of what you're being sold by other people and
Yeah.
what at some point you'll end up buying with us, but also sort of give you a little bit beyond what everyone else in the market is doing, right? So today it's more, here's the product you need to buy, but no one's going into, here's why you need to buy insurance. Here's what sort of options are available. And now here's what you need to pick between. So a lot of people sort of come at this point where they wait for you to hit their website, they wait for you to leave your number for a call agent, whereas we're going much earlier in the life cycle, right? So we're trying to engage with you before you even knew you had insurance, and this was the idea of know your card, right? I think
Yeah.
99% of people didn't know they had hidden insurance on their card. So we're trying to do a little bit of discovery plus transparency, which is quite broadly what we're solving for in insurance, right? That's sort of our problem statement going in.
So, uh, about your education, you graduated from Warwick University, you even worked in England. Why did you come back to India? Because a lot of people stay in the West, they prefer to stay in the West, but you chose the opposite path. You came to India from the West. Uh,
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I think, you may see all of those decision making frameworks online for, returning from XYZ country to India. And the one thing I'd say is a decision you need to sort of make yourself. So for me, it's partly family related reasons. But another sort of aspect of it was also, I kind of saw UPI as this inflection point in payments. I feel account aggregator will be an inflection point in terms of data sharing at a protocol level for banking data. And it almost seems like the time is right for someone to try to build a UPI for insurance. And to some extent, our thought process behind Bima Pay is the way we've also chosen the name is, could Bima Pay become something like Viraj at Bima Pay or Abdul at Bima Pay? And the
Yeah.
concept there is, it is almost like this virtual card or something which sits on your phone or which is linked to your Aadhaar, where every time you go to a hospital, a clinic, a garage, all of your insurance data is available with you at one place, and a claim can be pre-authenticated, right? So if you think of the way UPI works, right, it is just a data sharing protocol, right? Because money in India is now pretty much bits, right? Awkwardly, a lot of you may be from bits as well, but the concept here is, all you're doing is you're debiting and crediting two ledgers, right? So two entry books on either end. And with insurance, that ledger has a slightly trickier aspect where you have certain rules-based systems, right? So are you covered for this? Are you not covered for that? And our idea is, can we help build that framework to automate a lot of these rules that insurance companies have with internal markup languages? So we've actually built a hypertext markup language analog for insurance policies, and that's called a policy markup language. And where I see Bima Pay 10 years from today, right, is UPI for insurance in India.
Whoa, amazing. That's the least I can say. Uh, a lot of companies choose to work in stealth, right? A lot
Mm-hmm.
of new startups, they choose to work in stealth. They don't tell anyone about it. But you, on the other hand, you're pretty open about it everywhere. You post it on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, you post it on LinkedIn. What is the thought process behind this? Because this is an unconventional approach. So why did you choose to take that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good point. And I think working in stealth makes sense if you're doing something in the enterprise software space where you want to give your team an adequate amount of time to build a platform, work with one or two pilot customers who you've sourced from within your network. But increasingly, the way I think of what people in the general public define as building in public is a bit like SEO, right? You have to do it today. And the reason why it makes sense for Bima Pay is the two platforms that we target, right? LinkedIn, Twitter, is actually the places which aggregate our user persona, right? So going back to my description of our user persona for being that financially savvy 28 to 40-year-old, if you actually sit down and look at LinkedIn demographics, and just as an FYI tool for all of you, if you have a LinkedIn company handle, you can go into an analytics section, and the analytics section, even in the free LinkedIn enterprise version, the one where you don't pay for, gives you demographic information about the kind of people who are following your company. If you look at that demographic information on LinkedIn and you can broadly do something similar on Twitter, this is exactly the user persona we want to target, right? So the way I actually think of building in public, and the same with the rest of the team, is, look, we're telling you about our roadmap for today, tomorrow, maybe 1 month hence. But if there's someone else out there who's looking at our roadmap and then reacting, you don't know where we're headed. And therefore, we're always going to be n number of steps ahead of you. And at the end of the day, if you think in fintech you will not be copied, you're in for a really rude shock, right? Because there is very little that can't be copied in fintech. If you say your partners will only work with you, you're again in for a rude shock. They will work with anyone, right? Distribution is what kills in direct to consumer fintech. So for us, the idea was, is as we're building out the product, right, we want to start telling users a little bit about our story, about why we're doing this, how we're doing this, because that generates interest, right? And as a side note here, right, there's a lot of emphasis in India on this concept of growth, right? And awkwardly, growth is always associated with paid acquisition for some reason. But a lot of people don't appreciate this concept of the golden cohort principle. And the golden cohort principle simply says that in financial services, because of channel saturation, and channel saturation means the more you keep pumping distribution on a particular channel, the higher your cost of customer acquisition goes and the lower the customer lifetime value goes, simply because the interest in your product starts to wane out. So the further out you push your first paid acquisition, right, the better your metrics start to look at going into a series A, B, C, and beyond. So for us, right, just like the way any enterprise software company would invest in SEO, we're investing in what you would describe as building in public, right? Because if you look at what the job to be done for SEO is to bring a user who has some intent or interest into your market segment to your product. If you think of what building in public does, it is the same thing, right? There's someone who's remotely curious and they chance upon something you've written and then go and read about what you've done. So it's broadly similar. The objective is to acquire users, to build trust, build a following, and that's just broadly my answer, right? So I'd say
Yeah.
don't worry too much, right? Just be conscious that don't give away where you're headed, and I'm going to go on for a little long, but I think it's fairly important, right? There is a difference between giving away people information and insight, right? And a product insight is something you should keep very closely to yourself and your team, because a product insight is something you execute on. So even at BimaPay today, we have 3 or 4 core customer insights, which we do not share with anyone, right?
Mm.
And those core customer insights reflect in our roadmap n number of months from today, and will not make any sense to someone outside the company, right? Not even our investors, right? They may
Yeah.
have a rough idea of what these guys are doing, but that is what will really make your company. And as long as you're not sharing those core product insights with the general public and just sharing your methodologies, your frameworks, you're not really giving away anything, right? You're just probably creating a sort of aura around your company that these are an open, transparent group of people who want to build products for me. And that build for me is what probably attracts a lot of attention. That's sort of how I view it. And I wouldn't say it's like a it's not argument grounded in logic, right? I'm just sharing what some of my thoughts would be on it.
Yeah. It also helps the future customers like me, for example, connect with you or Bima Pay, as a matter of fact. Now, uh, you've been a national level swimmer. How would you say fitness helps you in doing all of this?
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think at least the one thing that swimming taught me, or just any performance sport will teach you after a point, is that you sort of need to realize that the more number of reps you put in and the more focus you put in, the closer you come towards your ultimate goal. But you also realize that the goal you're chasing is part a result of your sort of output and then also part luck, right?
Mm.
So what I really mean by luck here is in swimming, right? You may honestly mess up one of the tumble turns, right? And the tumble turn is that flip on the wall.
Yeah.
You may have done 10,000 of those, right? But there is that 1 out of 10,000 chance. And realizing that, and you may actually end up winning a race because the person faster than you messes up on the tumble turn, right? That's again luck working in your favor. So what you realize is you can really focus on the process, give it your 100%, but the outcome sometimes is a little outside of your control. And you probably just need to accept that and move on, right? And this is also true for startups where it's not only market product fit, but then there's this element of timing, right? You can do as much rationalization, oh, market timing is perfect, but only time will tell whether your timing was correct, right? So it's a fairly awkward one. I think performance sports teach you that, right? Because you work a whole year, in some cases 4 years, towards that one 30-second split or that one sort of minute split. And it's the same in the startup world, right? It's about nailing that seed pitch, nailing that series A pitch, nailing that one very small customer insight which completely changes your UI, which potentially takes you from no traction to a wild amount of traction. And quite often at early stage startup, you also realize that a lot of the traction you're getting is because one person somewhere decided to shout you out in a network disjointed from your personal network. So I guess what swimming also taught me is the importance of discipline, right? You actually sit there at the end of a swimming session and make notes on, what you did. And it's the same idea in startups, right? So a lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of sport is actually science, right? So you think Dhoni and all the guys just come home at the end of a practice session and are like, okay, chill maro kind of thing. But no, right? They go through the videos, they see where they messed up. And at least what swimming taught me is discipline of writing down, discipline of retrospective analyses. And that is very, very helpful in a startup, right? So after launching a new feature, not only you should be very excited you got the feature out of the door, but you should probably also look back and see what went well, what didn't go well, how can you improve that process. And you guys may think I'm sounding like some old uncle who has nothing better to do in life on a Sunday telling you this, but I cannot stress how important it is for you to sit down and write what you're thinking, because that writing really crystallizes your thought. And a lot of the product insight that has come from our team and in previous roles as well has always come when people sit down, write thoughts together, and retrospect as a team. And if you've played any performance sport, right, you will see this emerges quite often. So I'd say that's definitely something swimming has helped me with. But I think you don't have to be a performance athlete to appreciate this, right? You could
Yeah,
have also
absolutely.
try to crack an entrance exam and you understand how important it is to be disciplined.
Yeah. You talked about the timing. You started BMAP in September 2020. You graduated in 2019. Uh, and most of our audience is in that college space. So, if given a choice, what would you do? Would you start up in college, or would you choose to take some experience, take some job experience, and then start up?
Yeah, it's definitely it's an interesting one. And I'd say don't look at it as it's time for me to start up, but just start from something to want to make you start up, right? So
Yeah.
for me, it just happened that that moment appeared uh, in September or actually in August 2020. It could have also happened yesterday, right?
Mm.
And the main reason why I say this is the one thing that I can tell you, and again, right, gonna sound like the old uncle here, but it is difficult to run a company, right? It is difficult to run a company regardless of whether it's venture backed, self funded, revenue based, financing funded, because there are a lot of things you need to manage, right? And unless you're fundamentally in it for the right reasons, where the right reason is not hum startup karenge aaj, and it's आज मुझे अच्छा प्रॉब्लम मिला है मैं इस पे काम करूंगा, you're in deep shit, right? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And you see this happen, right? The whole co-founder conflict thing, the whole founding team sort of breaking up and everything. So I'd say there's no need for you to get super anxious about, oh, my friend is now Y-Combinator backed, raised money from Sequoia, they're in Surge, they're doing this and that. Everyone's on a different timeline, right? I had some
Yeah.
friends who peaked when they were 15 and they're drug addicts now. So honestly, relax. They were like 10 times better than me in school. They're doing nothing now. There are people in school who did absolutely nothing and they're doing incredibly well now. So everyone's on a different racetrack, right? And the one thing that I tell you is just use that time in college to observe what's going on around you, right? Because there's a lot that you will learn from seeing, you know, very few times in your life will you get to, and I know it's pandemic right now, but sit outside a chai tapri somewhere when you're skipping a college lecture and observe the problems people have, right? That is where you can get
Yeah.
some absolute cracker consumer insights, right? It's one thing I up on royally when I was in college, where I just spent too much time studying, right? Or just too much time playing. You can play video games as well, right? I learned something there as well. But observe what's happening around you, right? Because quite often the best way to find a problem worth solving is to just see what's going on around you. So there is no pressure to start up. And the one thing I can tell you is quite often it's a very fun and rewarding journey if you find someone within your network who's already started up and you can jump onto whatever kind of rocket ship or rocket port which they're building. So not everyone needs to be a founder. I think there's a bit of founder worshipping that goes on. But see, dude, like if you're doing it, be prepared. If the thing works out, there's a 5% chance of it working out. You're probably tied in there for 10 years, right? So if you start at 21, you're probably not going to see the light of day until 35, right? If it's even a wildly successful outcome. And even then, it'll be, a lot of people think, ek baar company beech liya, ash hai. You probably don't know lock-in clauses and stuff, right? They're horrendous. I don't want to discuss them. But even an M&A event, right, is not smooth. You have two to 3 years where you sit in a larger company trying to push your agenda. So think about it carefully, right? The one thing I'll tell you before starting up is definitely speak to at least 2 or 3 founders who've been through an M&A event, speak to 1 or 2 who have potentially shut a company, and try to speak to 1 or 2 who have really hit it out of the park, right? Just to get a range of perspectives and then go about it. So, and if you want me to ever have a chat with you, you can just reach out to me. I'm always happy to.
Yeah. Talking about the startups, and how do you think the startup industry in India has evolved or will evolve in the future?
Yeah. So I'm not older than most of the people here, right? Chances are some of you are the same age as me.
Yeah.
I've probably just been dabbling in this space a little longer. Some of you may have dabbled for longer than me, which is perfectly fine. I think what has changed now is because the first generation of startups have had liquidity events, where liquidity event means cash has been returned to founders and key employees, you've seen a new class of what I'd say reasonably wealthy people who emerged who have the appetite to take something called illiquidity risk. So illiquidity risk is this idea that I'm going to take a certain portion of my own money and park it into high risk assets where I cannot get out of them. So what do you start to see in every sort of network, right? Whether it's Silicon Valley, whether it's Shenzhen in China, whether it's the Luzon Valley anywhere else, what happens is capital starts to recycle, right? So you have 1 or 2 people who hit it out of the park, get 80 to 100 million in their bank. And the next thing they do the moment they get the money is saying, okay, time to invest in my juniors at college, right? That's literally what has happened. And now that junior at college has also hit it out of the park. So they're investing in their juniors. So what I'd say is a lot of us seem to have come at this point where capital is not scarce in some industries. Capital is scarce in some industries, I do agree. But there's also an opportunity for you to tap into a really incredible talent pool, right? So if I look at, a 3rd year, 4th year college student today, they've probably worked for 2 years at Bounce, 1.5 years at Grofers, another year somewhere else, right? They're pretty much coming out like, okay, crap, you already know everything that needs to be done. So you're almost like a startup operator the day you come out of college, right? So what's starting to happen is really young, really hungry, highly talented, highly experienced people. And it's fantastic, right? That's honestly what you need. So I'd say it's a bit of a gold rush. This is what excited a lot of people in our company to come back to India. So whether it's me, Vishruth, Abraz, 3 of us were abroad and decided to come back because we saw this as a pretty incredible opportunity. And just I guess the one thing I'd say is make the most of it, right? Because it seems right now the low interest rate environment allows you to build businesses that would have otherwise not been possible to build. So if you're looking at an electric vehicle company or any form of, a sort of a company which is an atoms business, not just a bits business. So atoms means you're, building physical infrastructure. The fact that the interest rate is so low from a macro lens really means that capital is chasing opportunities. So if you're a hard tech entrepreneur, someone who's doing mechanical engineering, you come up with something fantastic, like honestly, go for it today, because you never know when the market can turn. And that's sort of the way I see it, right? So TLDR, gold rush, can't complain, right? We're on to something here. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, I guess we can open it to the public now for the Q&A session. I'll open the chat up, guys. You guys can type it in there.
I mean, that's cool. Take your time with questions. How to know if the idea is worth it? Okay, this is a good one. So I've obviously not reached Series B where I can tell you, look, what we're working on makes sense. So here's the framework we used. But the one thing I can tell you is even if you go out and do quote unquote market validation, you could have always had some form of a bias in the sample set that you took for your initial market validation. So the only time you really know that your idea is good is when you start to see something. And let's go a bit further, right? So your idea may actually be fantastic, but the way you're trying to go about solving for that could potentially be wrong, right? I would say the idea may not be wrong, but your approach to actually, is an idea worth it? Well, you probably only know that when you're generating revenue, right? Or you start to see people pulling the product out of your company. So it's when people are coming and saying, why isn't this available? Why are your servers crashing, etc., etc. But I think Varun's question of how do you know if an idea is worth it? I think you probably know it in retrospect, right? Because there is no good or bad idea. It's just the outcome which a lot of people use to determine whether the idea is good or not. I'm gonna have to think this one through, Varun, but I'll give this a bit more thought. This is a really tricky one. So what's the one hypothesis, if proven wrong, will fundamentally change what you're trying to build? Okay, this is a really good one. So we have an internal hypothesis on CAC to LTV. For those of you who are curious, CAC to LTV is cost of customer acquisition to customer lifetime value. You typically want to target a 1 to 3 CAC to LTV ratio, which means for every rupee you spend acquiring a customer, you want to make sure that you get roughly 3 rupees back from the customer over their lifetime. We have a couple of ideas on channels, go to market. I think if that doesn't work out, that will probably change our approach from being direct to to business protocol level infrastructure. But that's a pretty tricky one. So someone's messaged me saying, how can you connect to me? The best way to connect to me is on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Twitter is ideal. My LinkedIn is full of marketing spam. How does your hiring process look like? How do you ensure your employees are retained? Okay, two really good questions. What does your hiring process look like? Well, quite simply, we use Notion to initially write down. Okay, let me take this up quite seriously, right, guys? Because hiring process is really important if you're early stage. The one thing I'll tell you is if you're trying to hire for a role, begin by trying to be the person who is actually doing that role. So, for example, we've just hired a product marketing manager. So far, every piece of marketing copy you see has either come from me or another person on the team. So, just begin by being able to articulate what you require someone to do in a given role. And then from there, just try to understand the kind of skill set that is required. If it's someone you're looking for very senior, then try to talk to people who are similar to that persona, right? So we're trying to hire for quote unquote VP engineering. Try to talk to a couple of senior engineers to understand how they think, how they approach a problem, etc. And that's how you can arrive at the kind of person you need. Once you've got that role description right, you probably need to think of the best place where you can find talent. So for us, so far, it's been a combination of inbound, Twitter, LinkedIn, very little sort of outbound from us. But every company has a different hiring process. Just the one thing that I can tell you is try to make sure you test them for their skills by giving them some form of a written task, which could either be coding or just typing something related. make sure that you have at least 3 to 4 people from your team. So not just you, but other people talking to them, and try to get an independent opinion from an advisor. So it could be a senior at college or one of your investors to also do a one-to-one chat with a new hire. Uh, Ensuring employee retention is definitely tricky. The one way to do that is to grant them an employee stock option plan. Given the fact that companies like Cred, Uncademy, etc., have returned cash on their ESOP plan, I think people are excited about it. If you're not sure what an ESOP is, or you have questions on ESOPs, I'm happy to take them myself outside of this. So next question is, how was your experience being a non-tech/design guy in the midst of all the hacker and hipsters? So awkwardly, I actually would say I'm fairly technical in the insurance industry, and also with the fact that I do write machine learning code. I've probably just not done server-side deployment, but the one thing that I can tell you is it's cool if you're a non-tech guy, right? There are enough great tools out there. You can hack something between Glide, Zapier, Notion, Figma. And even for your first set of customers, right, building a low code or no code solution is actually sufficient. You probably will need some hackers and hipsters in your first couple of hires, because they're probably the people who will bet on you. That's a good question. Uh, okay, this is a nice one. How do you find the right co-founders and team members? So what I don't tell a lot of people is I was actually working on something about a year ago with 2 other co-founders. What I kind of realized is I like to move lightning fast, experiment, build, measure, learn. And I couldn't find that in the other 2 people I was working with. Perhaps they're a bit older than me, etc., etc. So over here, I'm pretty much solo founder, but we started on day 0 with a team of 5, right? So going back to sort of team members, I think you've got the right team members when they're in it for the right reasons. So there's some people who are in this because they've had a bad insurance claims experience, or they're in it because they've known me for a certain period of time. We've sort of interacted externally as well. And this is also one of the reasons why, you see BITS and IIT and NIT and all of these colleges churning out really good teams, because you get that 4 years where you get to know a batchmate, a dorm mate, someone you've been to classes with. And quite often you found the right co-founder when you think this is a great guy, great, whoever, great person, we get along well. And just the one thing that I can tell you is there's a lot of emphasis on this idea that you have to have a co-founder. The one thing that I can tell you is having a co-founder obviously lets you move faster, but also brings in something called counterparty risk, right? Which is, if there are 2 co-founders who have issues with each other, that's what actually kills a company, and not lack of market product fit. So my personal view is either go solo or go with 3 people, because then with 3, there's always like a 2-to-1 and you can sort out issues. But I think some venture investors will disagree. And given the fact that I hope to raise money from them, I'm going to shut up now, because they'll probably look at this and say, "Aadmi kuch bhi bakwas bol raha hai." Okay, someone's asked me 3 things that one needs to practice day in and day out before starting up. Holy, this is difficult. uh, okay, the one thing I'd say is learn to make decisions, and learn to make decisions with imperfect information. So if you find yourself saying, I do not have enough information, I cannot take a stance, or I'm not sure because I don't have full clarity, you probably want to change that, right? Because startups is a lot of decision making under uncertainty. And in some cases, the uncertainty is literally like, I don't have perfect information. I've only done 10 customer conversations. Is this reflective of the general population? So that decision making under uncertainty with imperfect information, just learn to sort of crack that muscle, right? So a bit of gut intuition, try to build that. You won't always be right, but at least you'll be prepared to face the consequences of your decision. That's probably the main one, I'd say. How do you know when to back out? Oh, yeah, this is a good one. I think it's probably best to ask that question to someone who's relentlessly chased something and not succeeded, and then someone who's relentlessly chased something and succeeded. I think we're too early in the journey for me to comment on how do you know when to back out, just because we've not had that kind of a situation as yet. So how do you keep the business safe if a second demonetization hits? Oh my. Well, fortunately, a lot of insurance is online payments. So I'm not too worried if a second demonetization comes in, because you have to pay an insurance premium online or via digital means in most cases, right? That's how a certificate gets issued.
With UPI, it wouldn't affect you much, right?
Nah, not exactly. Right? So I guess what Aditya means here is downturn, right? An economic
Yeah.
downturn. You're right. Insurance is one of those discretionary spends in India, and see, right, it's a risk you take, right? You can probably say the same thing for direct to consumer sort of luxury food brands, etc. So one thing I'll sort of encourage you is check out Hamilton Helmer's 7 Powers. I can send you the link to that, Viraj, but it's a nice sort of model for you to understand what the weak points of your business and your industry are. And I actually treat insurance as a bit of a luxury in India, but it's actually a necessity, right? From a customer perspective, luxury. That's a pretty good question. So someone said RIP. Hopefully that's not for our business model, and just a general
Same.
comment. How do you decide whether to go for bootstrap model or funded one? Okay, this is really good. Um, I'm fairly confident Harish does not need to raise money for curious Harish, right? He can hit a venture scale outcome without having to raise money because he's building a community. For Bima Pay, I know upfront that there is a pretty large technology investment in building a platform, pretty large investment in getting an insurance brokerage license. I do not have N crore rupees sitting to be able to bear that expense myself. There are some people who bootstrap an insurance brokerage. I definitely can't do that. So as long as you can justify the need for you, uh, for those of you who are not familiar with the cash flow cycle of a typical business, right? It's a bit like a vertical, so a horizontal line which denotes zero, and then this S sort of shape, right? So if you have an initial period of investment where you're burning money, and then you think you can come out of the top positive, that's sort of when you go out to raise money. So if you're building, core platform, core infrastructure, physical infrastructure, definitely try to raise venture money. Another approach is, why are you raising the money, right? Is it because your investors bring you something very, very valuable on the table? Is it that the venture money lets you crowd out competition, right? So you raise so much and you raise so fast that everyone is like, okay, I'm retiring from this space. These people are completely mad. This is what sort of happens in the food delivery business, right? You saw how
Yeah.
quickly those companies raised round after round after round, and they consolidated pretty fast. You probably didn't want to bootstrap in that kind of a market. Uh, okay. How is the VC funding scene? Okay. Okay. How is the VC funding scene? I would say my experience is very different from everyone else. So we raised pre-product, pre-revenue, pre-traction. I know some people are still struggling to raise. So also VC funding scene, you also need to segment this by which industry vertical and something called the zeitgeist of the time. So zeitgeist is this idea that people are excited about the space, investors are excited about the space. That's probably the case in insurance right now, wasn't the case 6 years ago, right? So if a 23-year-old knocked on the door of, insert pedigree investor 4 years ago, they'd have probably thrown me out of the front door, right? But today they're sort of willing to entertain me, maybe because the sector is hot. They've probably seen me writing a little bit. And the awkward thing is that people who can still till today walk into any VC's office and get funded for ludicrous ideas, right? So I see some stupid shit getting funded today as well. And I shouldn't say that, but I think some of them are stupid shit. You can probably say that for BimaPay as well, and I invite you to. I'd love to hear why. But I also see some really good companies, great traction, getting no money, right? Which just shocks the daylights out of me. So, bit of a tricky one. Is technical software based idea or product based idea better according to the market? Okay, this is a good one. Product is typically the layer which you wrap around whatever software you're building. I'm not 100% sure, Varun. This is a tricky one. So, okay. So Krishna says, got an idea. What's the perfect startup process? How to find investors? There is no perfect process, man. Everyone will tell you a very different story. The one thing I'll say, the secret sauce, there's something called forward momentum. So from the day you first reach out to the investors, through that entire fundraising process, you really want to show you, your team, and your company are making a lot of progress on whatever North Star metric you set. So a North Star metric is this idea that you want to align everyone, including your investors, to a single objective that you have. So for YouTube, the North Star metric is actually number of minutes or number of seconds watched, right? It's a fantastic metric because everyone knows what to look for. And you just want to show people that you're moving fast towards a North Star that you set. So for Harish today with Curious Harish, North Star may be 50,000 Discord member, total sign up, 1,000 DAU, right? That could also be a North Star, but that's great. As long as you show that DAO figure growing, that's his North Star. That's what you probably need to raise some money. How do you imbibe the importance of product to community? Oh, this is an interesting one. So I have slightly divergent views here. I think everyone's trying to build a community around their product today. And I fundamentally think unless your community is improving your product and not in the traditional sense where every extra community member gives you some gyan and therefore your product improves, I somehow feel community is just another way to masquerade customer insight, right? The biggest fear I have with community is you're sometimes doing a sort of product decision by committee, which is this idea that uh, you don't want to have 10 customers in the room because one customer who probably stands out with a good voice, good face, probably has a lot of weight of the crowd behind them. So wherever possible, think through community as to how does it add value to every other member. If it doesn't, you probably don't want to do that. So we really don't have a community, right? We prefer to do one-to-one conversations also because insurance is fairly personal. Like you don't want to go to a community forum and say, I suffer from XYZ health condition. Could I still get health insurance? Yeah, probably not going to ask us that, right? We can anonymize that question later on and post it to a forum. Thoughts on ESOP? Well, that's a nice one, Preet. I think with ESOPs, if you are the recipient of ESOPs, just make sure you've read the documents properly. I think ESOPs do work in the upside case. Also, the fact that ESOPs are fairly, I'd say, new in India in terms of them generating money, it probably needs a little bit of time to be proven out, right? Because few companies have really returned money on them. How do you decide if you should or shouldn't start up if you're having really big competitors? Okay, this is a nice one because it's definitely true about BimaPay with direct-to-consumer insurance. And chances are that really big competitor could buy you out, right? You probably have some unique product inside which you don't see the really big competitor executing on. And there's a good chance they don't even have the time or managerial bandwidth, right? I wouldn't worry. Go for it, because if you're doing something good there will be someone willing to buy the business. Or you may just find something great and kill the big competition, right? That's the best case scenario. So what is BimaPay's North Star right now? Nice one, Hardik. Effectively product development, right? If you go check like some earlier versions of the product versus what we are now, I guess our North Star by the end of March is to have that wallet by BimaPay product built out to what our sort of product vision is for that sort of feature set. So it's not even user acquisition, it's primarily product development. Also because we're pre-product, right? Not even pre-market product fit. Basic difference between startup versus bossiness versus entrepreneurship. Oh, this is good. So you can be an entrepreneur without running a startup. You can be an entrepreneur without being a bossy person. And you can be bossy without being an entrepreneur, without working at a startup, right? Just go to any big corporate, listen to the engagement managers at McKinsey, right? They'll just pile on a ton of work on you. I didn't say this. This is ground facts. But I guess if you are inherently a bossy person, you could run a startup or do anything, right? There's probably no correlation between startup bossiness and entrepreneurship. I think
I think he means business instead of bossiness. It's probably just a typo.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Just pick what's right for you, right? There's no harm even running family business because you're potentially, as long as you're generating revenue, you're probably having positive impact on someone. So just think of what your personal North Star is, right? Is it impact? Is it fun? And then optimize for that. That's probably how I'd see it. But yeah, these are some really good questions.
Yeah, that's pretty much the end. Maybe we can take a photograph with everyone turning on their cam. That'd be nice, I think.
Hey Rahul, it's Harish. Thanks a lot for joining in. Learned a lot on the way.
You're welcome, man.
And also thanks for building in public. Like I'm pretty sure it helps out a lot of young founders who face like similar problems. So pretty cool with that.
Most welcome, man. Most welcome. And see, guys, if you want to reach out to me, just avoid LinkedIn, please. Please reach out to me on Twitter because I just get too much. I'm sure Harish, you're probably also seeing this, right? Lots of people trying to sell you everything from snake oil to video chat tools, which you don't need.
Yeah, I got 500 LinkedIn happy birthdays. So it's just flooded.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You'll reach a point where it's 2000, right? I've also had that, and you just don't want to respond.
Cool, guys. Maybe you can turn on your camera just for a picture.
Cool. Then thanks, Rahul, for coming. I learned a lot. And yeah, let's just end the meeting now. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining
All
us.
right, guys.
Take care, Rahul. All the best.
You.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks, Rahul. Learned a lot.
Thank you. See you.
See ya.
See you.